how did you feel about Spotify Wraps this year?
Mine was embarrassing, so I couldn't post it, basically. but I like it. I feel like they stole my text a little bit, but that's
This is what I was thinking.
I think that's where the question was linked from. Yeah, I literally thought exactly the same thing.
Do you know what? I don't know how to say this without sounding like an absolute twat, but I feel like I get copied weekly at the moment, and I don't know whether to see it as flattery or as to get really enraged about it, but I am just trying to kind of ignore it. But yeah, the Spotify Wrap thing, I was like, the thing that annoys me, I'm like, just hire me. Like, I'm nice. Yeah. I'll work with you. Like, it's Spotify. I'm not going to be like, ooh, yuck, no. Just email me, man. That's the thing that annoys me. But
I guess for a lot of these companies, they've got their in-house graphic design team, and so they will see something they like, and then it will be rolled out.
I just feel like that's how you're taught as well. Like in design school or when you're studying, like they teach you so much to reference, and they rarely say like, "Cool, you can reference," but at the end of the day, there's a human being or a studio that's made that piece of work, and they own that, and that's their thing. It's not okay to just steal it. I think they just go like, pull all these things you like and base it and make something, and you're like, cool, but like that person spent a lifetime making their style, and no one's gonna like you or respect you for stealing that. Like, it's not just me, it happens to everyone.
When we had Adam JK on the show, he was talking about I don't own handwriting, but I do own my own handwriting, and I see my own handwriting used by these companies and these ads and stuff, and it's super frustrating. And I think I guess the good thing is now that because a lot of artists can have a platform to call this stuff out, that we do see it happening less, and it's going to be like versions of rather than kind of direct rip-offs. But yeah, it's still happening. It's still a problem.
Yeah, and it's different because I've taught a few guest lectures and guest workshops at different universities around the world, and that's really different because like often I'm making like doing a workshop where I'll be like, here, make a type poster that's kind of like vaguely inspired by my style, and they're super young, they're like 18, 19, and they're just learning, and they might make a poster and it might look like my work, but I'm like, cool, that's so fine. Like that's such a different thing because it's like a young student trying to find their style and stuff. It depresses me when it's like an in-house agency at like a really big brand. Like these people should be at the top of their game. They shouldn't just be jacking from, other people's style. Or if they are, they should just be working with that person. That's what I always kind of find baffling, that they don't think to work for that person. But I don't know, I'm not really one for call out. Like I'm not like, they copied me, like go fuck yourselves. Like I feel like that's really just a bad vibe. But sometimes I'm just like, man, come on, like it kind of upsets me in a way. Like I put so much of my heart and like life into my work that I'm like, I see it as an extension of my personality. So it's, it feels a bit like it kind of hurts me in a way.
Yeah, there's definitely that balance there, isn't it? Is because I always recommend that if someone's first starting in art or design or anything, that they look and find people to take reference from and like start to emulate them, because by doing that you'll learn those techniques. But I think there definitely needs to be that balance of like, it's the same as, well, at school, if you're writing, if you go and copy someone's words, that's called plagiarism, and then you'll get kind of kicked out of your class for it, or you'll kind of fail the exam. Whereas I feel like that almost needs to be taken more into the art world of being like, this is where I've taken reference from. Because if you're writing an essay, you put your little reference points at the bottom. And I think that's where it's probably because of social media and people have the need of, I've created something, so I have to put it out on the internet. And it's like, and otherwise it didn't happen. And it's that kind of little thing that I think people just need to make sure that if they do copy someone, they write, this is inspired by this person. Because then it's kind of acknowledging that's where it came from. And it's not someone trying to like trick someone else into saying, this is the work that I created, this is from my own brain. Because I think at the end of the day, but then I suppose it's an interesting one, because I suppose there's that weird, at some point there must be that flip of, well, this is references, but now my own style's starting to form, but obviously it's still inspired by that. And there needs to be at some point when I can say that's no longer inspired by that.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I don't really know what the answer is because it's so like widespread now. But I think crediting people is probably at least a good start and a good practice. But I think more what would be good is being like, hey, I like that thing. Who made that? Let's contact them then.
Especially when it gets up to that agency level of like, they can afford to get someone in to do this. It's like, that is just a complete rip off of these certain things.
And I always say, like, I would love to have a BMW. I can't afford one. So like, that's just the reality of this. So I could, but it would be very expensive and I don't want to spend that much money. So it's like, I accept the fact that I don't have a BMW. And it's a similar thing. It's like, yeah, you might want that, but if you aren't willing to pay for it or can't afford it, like, you just have to
just can't have
that.
it.
That's just the reality of life. You know?
So when building up your own style, how did that kind of evolve from kind of where it first started to where it is now?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like my trajectory was a bit weird. So like I wanted to do a million different things when I was younger, but I went and studied graphic design mainly because I've pretty much failed school, and I didn't want to go to art school. I wanted to study film, but I didn't get into the university because I failed school. I didn't really even know what graphic design was, so I just kind of did it. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to be creative and make things. So when I first started making work, like when I first started studying graphic design, I was being taught all of like Photoshop and all of these things, but I wasn't necessarily being like, cool, now I can design like a flyer for a cafe. I was like, okay, this is just my medium of how I can now make work. And I think especially like originally, because I'd wanted to go into film, I made so many GIFs because I'd wanted to make moving image and I'd wanted to make music videos. And like so many music videos at that time were very DIY. And I love like MIA and Sanagold and artists like that, where they really like made their music videos in Photoshop. So I was kind of attacking it from that angle as opposed to more of a graphic designer. So I did that and I made all of this work, and then I went off and worked in advertising for 5 or 6 years. And I just stopped making all of that kind of crazy work, and then it went full circle and I went back to that. But it's funny if I compare it now, like the work I was making when I first started studying and the work I'm making now is pretty similar. It's just been refined kind of over some years. And obviously working in advertising for all that time gave me a way to find how I could make my work accessible to people, as opposed to just making like this jumble and mess of colors. It was like, okay, you can do that, but at the end of the day, there's someone at the end that has to receive that information and process it. So how do you make it digestible to that person? So yeah, it's funny that it's basically gone full circle. I did a talk this time last year, and I was just going through my old hard drives, finding my old work, and I'm like, I was getting to a point where I was like, I don't know if I made this last month or at the very start of my career. Like it was getting a little confusing. But yeah, I think it's just at different points in my career, I've just made different things. And then about 3 years ago, when I was really like, okay, I'm going to be like Kris the artist now, I just like kind of invested in myself, and I was like, I'm going to spend time to like hone all of these things I've been making and all of these things I've been doing. And I'm going to be like, mix them all into one and be like, this is basically what I'm making. But it came very naturally. I'm not forcing a style upon myself. It's just literally when I sit down, that's what I make. And around that time is when I stopped referencing and I barely look at other people's. I look at other people's work all the time, but I never sit down when I start a project with like references. I just sit down and start making. I find it really toxic to look at other people's work when I'm starting work, but I get really inspired by other people's work in a sense that I'm like, cool, they've done a cool thing, that's really exciting, how good for them. I'm going to do my own thing in that lane. I get jealous of people when they do really well, like everyone does, but I'm not like, well, I wish I did that exact piece. I'm just like, man, I wish I got that project.
That's really interesting, because I think like I'm a photographer and I don't actually follow many other photographers, but every now and again I will come across people's work that I really like, and I'm like, oh, that's sick, and I'll have a scroll on the feed for a bit, and I'm like, this is super inspiring. But then I won't follow them because I know if I do, I'm just gonna start copying them, and it's like a good way to kind of just look, but then not get too far into it, because then it's like you're not copying, it's just something's implanted in your memory somewhere, and you're taking like a little bit of inspiration that you saw at some point. That's why I really like Pinterest, because on that, it's like you don't know who the artist is. It's hard to then go down and find out exactly who they are unless you really research it. So you can get this like really nice scroll of just like different bits of inspiration without specifically copying one person.
It's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a very, very good animator, and we were chatting, and I noticed it because we've been friends for a while, and I was like, he doesn't follow me on Instagram, and I was like, you dick, like, come on, what are you doing? And he's like, I had to unfollow you because I felt like I was too inspired by you, that I was copying. So he's like, I'm still your friend, I just don't follow you on Instagram because if I look at your work every day, it's going to end up. But it's funny because I'd never once thought like, oh, he's trying, like, I've never thought his work looks like mine at all. I mean, it's in a similar vein. But it's funny, as you say, photographer, like, I don't follow any designers, I don't think. I don't see myself as a designer. It's just that's kind of the world I kind of vaguely came from, and that's what I studied. But I've always seen myself as an artist that studied as a designer. So I follow more like artists and illustrators and photographers and filmmakers and musicians. Like, that's more my world. But I guess I have like the skill set of a designer. It's always good to follow people that are like on the other spectrum of art, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what really pushes you in a direction that becomes unique then, because it's like, if this is happening in the current medium that you work in, then it's like there might be trends happening there that you don't want to slip into. Because I feel like a lot of people make those mistakes of just like, what's trendy right now? I'm just going to copy that. What's trendy now? I keep copying that. And they never really develop a style that's unique to them. They never get really known for one thing. Whereas I think by ignoring that and then focusing on taking inspiration from other things that you like, that's where your work becomes more you, because it's like, I'm not just copying what this other person's done, because what that other person's done is based on all the things that they like in their life, that they've come together to make that piece. Whereas for me, it'd be like, well, what TV shows do I like? What cartoons do I like? What magazines do I like? And like trying to take inspiration from other places and bring that into your work. I think that's where it becomes a bit more unique.
I think that's just the best way to approach like creativity in general, is to not get too in your bubble of like the medium that you're in, and like just see it as like, you know, an output in general, because you might change. Like, I might end up making films. Like, who knows? You know, like that was what I wanted to do at one stage earlier in my life. And maybe eventually I will be directing music videos. Who knows? Like, there's a long career ahead. But it's nice to be like constantly influenced by that and looking at it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we were talking earlier about the Spotify thing, it's like, you know, that work was, well, you almost certainly know that work was created with that kind of style guide reference point. Like, here's the things that we've trawled off the internet that we really like. Your work was probably on there along with a couple of other people's. And it's like, so we don't get something that's kind of groundbreaking and exciting. We just get a derivative of something else. But I suppose that's the sort of system that exists in the 9 to 5. And it must be interesting for you because you've come from that 9 to 5 world. Like, what was the point where you were like, I've got to not do this anymore and go back to what I was doing before my 9 to 5?
Yeah, I just fucking hated it. Like, I'm so glad you can let me swear, because I feel like you can get a lot of emphasis out of swearing. But I really hated it. I mean, a lot of people work in advertising and they honestly really enjoy it and they get a lot out of it. And I couldn't be more happy for them, you know, each to their own. It's just, I have never been like, I'm very opinionated, and I always like to stand up for the things I believe in, and I don't like being told what to do. You know, so a lot of that doesn't really work in the advertising world. So I just got so fed up in the end, and I was like, I would rather go work in a cafe. Like, I had this kind of epiphany. I went camping in the middle of nowhere, and there was these huts on the beach, and it was like near a town, so I could have got a job in the town. And I was like, I'm happy. If that's my life, I can live in that hut and I can go and work in the local cafe. That'll suit me fine. I don't need a lot of money. I don't give a shit. And I was like, okay, why am I working in advertising? I fucking hate it. I've got two alternatives. I go and live in that hut and work in a cafe, or I try and make a living out of art. And so that's basically what I did. And I was working at this contract, and it was just really bad. I hated it so much. And I was getting really frustrated, and I wanted to be saying things with my work. So I just started making work on the side again. and it felt really exciting. I felt really excited by work, which I hadn't felt for such a long time. So I made all of this work, and I felt really liberated because I was like finally had a place to put all of my views on the planet and on my community and things like that. And I could put that somewhere and be like, here, look at it. And so I basically just quit advertising, had an exhibition, and then it just went from there. And I know that sounds like it's really fast, but I mean, there was years leading up to that, like kind of tip of the iceberg where I was like, okay, I'm fucking done. Like, and I'm willing to risk like losing everything and going working in a cafe. Not that that's a bad job, but you know, like it's not going to pay a shit ton of money and, you know, all these things. So, yeah, I just felt like I had nothing left to lose, or nothing to lose basically. And I'd accepted the plan B, and fortunately plan A worked out. But yeah, I felt like it was a long process to get to that. And I think I also just stopped caring what people thought of me and started to be really honest and make work that I thought was like the best thing I could make, and that it stood for something. And obviously I'm gay, and I wanted to put that in my work, and I wanted to stand up for my community. And when I started doing that, people started to relate to it because they were like, oh, okay, like that's a valid opinion on this topic. Let's discuss. So that was really liberating for me as well, because I think before that people were like, Kris is a little intense. And when they could see my work, they were like, a little less intense. I understand it now. He kind of makes sense. So I feel like if you take my work away, it's very, I'll just be going back to be like slightly annoying. Whereas when the work's there, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. The full thing it's okay. He's not so bad.
Yeah, you mentioned in your Adobe Max talk that I watched recently, you were saying that your work is the vessel of dealing with what you're going through.
I don't know if it was my family that taught me this or my friends or whatever. I'm quite an emotional person, and I like to get it out and like express what I'm feeling as opposed to bottling it up. But so I think that comes out naturally. Also, like for no other reason than like when you work with type, you have to say something. Yeah. So I was like, well, I could say something like good vibes only, or I could be like, well, I'm kind of pissed off about this, or I feel really strongly about this. I'll just make a poster to illustrate that. And then at least I'll feel like I've dealt with that and I've gotten that kind of emotion out of me. So I felt like it is definitely a vessel. But then on the flip side, like sometimes I just want to make work. Like it doesn't always have to be like save the planet or like gay rights now. Sometimes it can just be like a pile of like whatever, and that's okay too. But I feel like at the core, I tried to at least make sure there is a large percentage of my work that is like representing how I feel about things.
Did you ever feel nervous putting that out in the fact that because it is so personal to you that it might be rejected?
No, I feel like the opposite, because I was like, I don't care. It's like the way I knew deep down that I was like, not that I was right, that sounds really wanky. I was like, no, but I knew deep down that I had good intentions. So I was like, if someone doesn't like it, I don't care, because like if I put a message in my work, it's probably that I want something to be better. It's not that I'm like trying to like pull someone down or anything. So if they don't like it, if someone doesn't like it, I'm like, well, okay. Also, like I always have this rule that you'll never be 100% happy with anything ever. Like nothing will ever satisfy you 100%. 80% is achievable. So if you just throughout your life go, do you know what, 80% of the time this will work and these things will be good. 20% of the time it won't work and I'll be unhappy, or someone, whatever. So I'm like, 20% of people don't like my work, couldn't give a flying fuck. As long as 80% is like, okay, yeah, he's like, that's fine. I mean, hopefully it's 80%. Hopefully it's not like 10% of people being like, yeah, you go, Kris. And the other 90 are like, what a dick. Yeah. So, I just don't. It's not that I don't care. I care immensely about my work. I'm not upset if someone's not going to like it. I'm more upset if someone steals it, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but I guess it's like, it's for the people that like it, you're glad that they like it. And for the people that don't like it, you don't really give a fuck because it's not for them.
No, well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's incredibly true. And so I was talking to someone today, and it was very random, like a friend, and they were like, oh, I was at a dinner party the other night with this girl, and she was 18 and she'd just come out to her parents, and it hadn't gone that well. And I was like, wow, this is very hectic. And then she's like, oh, but she's a massive fan of your work. And I was like, oh, that's also super random, but it was really nice because she was like, I can't, again, how do I say this without sounding like a dick? She was like, I really looked to his work, that his like confidence in his sexuality, and I felt empowered is maybe not the right word, but like I felt like stronger. And I'm not saying like she probably has lots of influences that got her to the point. Yeah. But it was nice to know that like I had a small impact on an incredibly difficult thing in her life. That's so that will make up for 10 people or whatever. Like if there's a negative thing coming in, I'll be like, whatever, that one person, like that's pretty great. Because I know from my own experience, like when there's people that I've looked up to in a similar context, like that's meant a lot to me. So if I can mean that to someone else, that's like insane.
Yeah. I think there's something really powerful as well about putting work out with confidence, because I think most people aren't that confident, I would probably say, as like a general rule in what they do. And I think just to find someone who's a bit of a role model who oozes that confidence, I think it's like why we love celebrity and that kind of thing. It's just, you look at someone on stage and you're like, they are so confident, I want to be them. And it's like, not that you want to be them in like doing the same job and that kind of thing. You just want to have the perceived confidence that they have. And I think that's why it's so important as artists to put work out that helps kind of empower people to give them that confidence. Like even if at the time of posting it or making it, you don't actually feel that, if you can convey things in a way that says like, I'm confident in what I'm doing, that really rubs off on people.
100%. And I was like the shyest kid. Like I was painfully shy, and I had to really work to be confident and to like believe in myself and things. Like it was a lot of effort it took. So I feel like I've earned it in a way, and I'm like, when people are really shy, I'm like, it's fine. Not everyone has to be really confident and really extroverted, but I'm like, like I was shy too. It's you can get there. Kelly Anna has been on your podcast as well, and Kelly's one of my best friends from ages ago, and she has this slogan that she kind of always uses, and she says, "Be stupidly confident." And I just think it is genius, because I mean she is a genius anyway, but it's just such a genius slogan in so many ways. And I think as well, like sometimes confidence is stupidity, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like sometimes you just have to like get out of yourself a bit and not be so like in your head and be like, I'm just going to do this and I'm not going to overthink it and I'm not going to like deconstruct it on all these levels and hope that it's right. I'm just going to fucking go and do it and hope that it works. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. And just that kind of like be stupidly confident, I think is because you can. And someone also said something recently to me that like anxiety has no outcome on the result. And I'm like, that's so true. Like we spend so much of our life being really anxious about things that we actually can't even control in the end. So you may as well just like go for it. And then if it doesn't work out, like it's not the end of the world, really.
It's almost like confidence is doing something before you think about it. Whereas as soon as you start to think about it, that's where anxiety and all the kind of questions come in. 100%, so it's like just going to do it. And I suppose that's probably where confidence comes from. It's almost like you're not consciously thinking about it. It's almost like your subconscious has decided that's what you're going to do, and you just go and do it, rather than letting your like conscious mull through it and think about how many ways it could fail before you even go into it.
But I think this is the thing that I always say to people, like, be honest about your work, or like just if you make work that comes to you really naturally and that is like rooted to you, who you are as your being, like your cultural background or your sexuality, or any like everyone has a situation that they've come from. And that's what you should put in your work. That, and everyone's also had like the house that they grew up that had like yellow curtains, or like their parents had a blue car, or they grew up near the forest. Like everyone has these like insane things that has like formed their visual language over time. And that's what you should put into your work, because then you don't have to question it as much, because you're like, okay, maybe someone can question it, but this is literally the person that I am, and these are all my influences throughout my life. So if you don't like it, so be it. But like, this is all I got, like these are my things. Whereas I feel like if you're like trying to kind of cobble things together from other influences, yeah, probably you are like, oh, is it good enough? I'm not really sure, because you're probably comparing it to the original. And then maybe it isn't good enough because it's not as good as the original. Whereas if you're just making something that's really honest to you, I think you can't really go wrong with that, to be honest.
As you're saying that, it's making me think about like when we do public speaking. It's like quite a few people will be like, how are you so good? Like how are you so confident when it comes to public speaking? It's like, because I'm just talking about my own experiences in my own life. It's the easiest thing. I can't go wrong because I know exactly what 100%. I'm talking about. Whereas if you said to me, can you do, okay, you've got a week, you're going to do a presentation on the Egyptians around this certain period and it has to be flawless. I'd be like, fuck, so you're trying to remember something that's not you. And I think that's what a lot of people 100%. Get mixed up with. It's like they're not authentic to themselves. They're not just telling their own story. They're trying to tell someone else's. And
probably they're like, oh, remember that time in like grade 9 English class where I had to give an essay on like the French Revolution? And you're like, well, yeah, you learn about that, but it doesn't relate to you at all.
Yeah,
so you are really nervous. Whereas, as you say, when you're public speaking and you're talking about your life or your career, it's really easy because you literally are just talking. I mean, of course, then you still get nervous sometimes because you're like, that's 1,000 people. Wow. But at least you know what you're gonna talk about, so that definitely makes it easier.
Yeah, no, and I think if we fuck it up, we just find it quite funny.
Well, that too. Yeah, humility will get you very far. Yeah.
So going back to working in the ad industry, obviously you said that you fucking hated it, so you got out of that. But is there anything that because I think when we do learn these jobs, we pick up quite a lot actually by working a 9 to 5. Was there anything that you picked up during the 9 to 5 that you have brought into your work that's kind of helping you now?
For sure. Like, I mean, I say negative things about it, but I learned so much working in advertising, and that's why I never discourage people from going into it, because it can be incredibly cool and you can learn a lot and you can get amazing opportunities out of it. I feel like I learned a lot of things. I learned how to work really fast because I always was working for like massive kind of agencies for the most part, where there was just never any time and you were always against it. And so I just learned how to work really, really fast, which is a really good tool now. You also learn how to just think really, like there were so many times where I'd like design like, you know, a rectangle ad, and then they'd be like, okay, now it has to fit on the side of a bus and like on a billboard that's like 28 meters long and 1 meter high, and you learn how to make work at like so many different scales. And I think that's also really important to, because especially now with Instagram, like people are just designing so often in this rectangle, and that's quite unrealistic out in the world. And it's kind of cool to, especially like when you get into product design or clothing and things like that, like again, you're not designing a rectangle. You've got to think about like how it's going to be on the body and things like that. So I learned, how to make work kind of fit in lots of different things. I learned like a pretty good work ethic, I think. I learned what not to do, like when it comes to a work ethic. I guess to work with other people and that you can learn from other people. And you can also learn when people don't deserve your time at all. And that's okay. And I think I also learned how to present work, because quite often you'll do a job and you've got to like present it to your creative director or whatever and be like, this is why I did this. And creative directors can be quite like harsh, I guess. And they're like, don't do this. Why would you have done that? And you always have to have an answer. So over time, you kind of develop this way of explaining your work.
I think it's so interesting with you because like your work kind of blurs the line between art and design. And I think had you known yourself earlier, you might have not taken the graphic design route, but I feel like it's really cool that you did, because like now you have all of these tools of like behaving like an artist, but having at your disposal the ability to like just do so much with graphic design. Like I think so many artists could benefit from just learning the basics of Photoshop, of being able to put together a client deck would just go so far to helping a lot of artists get a lot more 100%. Opportunities.
Had I have gone to art school, I just like it wouldn't have. I just know friends and they were like, oh, go outside and like look at the sun and then paint a chair for 3 days. I would have been like, are you serious? Like as much as I am an artist that trained as a designer, I like the function of design. I like that it's it kind of has a purpose in it. There's like an end point, whereas sometimes I get frustrated with art because it's too self-indulgent and it's too like I don't know, just too like off with the fairies in a way. It's like I like the middle ground where you take, you get rid of all the rules that kind of come with graphic design, but you have enough rules that you can, like pull in the art a bit and make it. Because I really don't like when work alienates people. I think it's really nice when people can access your work, and I think often with the art world it's very alienating, and I really don't like that. I think it should be for anyone to digest, or at least for my work anyway. So you're right, I do sit somewhere in the middle, and I'm quite content there, I must say.
I guess it makes it exclusive when you make it hard to understand, because there's not that like kind of access point into a lot of, if we look at like a lot of people on the street are not going to go and look in a gallery because they feel like it's not for them. And there's so many factors over the years, like rooted in history, that mean that a gallery is not an accessible person. I mean, partly if you look at sort of when we go back in history, the only people that are being recorded in these portraits are the lords and ladies, like the top 1%, the people that are like, you don't go and see images of like the serfs in the 1700s or anything, do you? Is everything is like kind of this high, this is not for you, this is for us, the elite, which I think, I guess it is changing. And I think things like street art changed that. And I think the internet has changed that massively. And I think making work that people can understand, I think is gonna get you a larger audience. And you're gonna be able to help more people, and you're gonna be able to change more.
And you'll just get more work. And so, like, if you want to be really shallow about it, it's a lot easier to hire someone that's accessible. And because that's a question that I feel like I get asked a lot from students. They're like, "How do you get hired?" And you're like, "Well, if you make something that's really accessible to people, you become a lot more hireable than someone who's making really difficult things." Like, not that's everyone's different and everyone wants to do their thing, and there's space for everyone. But I think for me, I like to appeal to like a broader audience and have as many people see like my work as humanly possible. I'm always going to want more people to see it, I think.
I suppose it's thinking about like what your end goal is. Like if you want your art to be your career, then it's going to have to appeal to a certain amount of people to consume it. Otherwise, there's no money in there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just want to do it for a hobby, you can go away with the fairs as much as you want, and it can only appeal to 3 people in the whole world, or even just you. You can just create for yourself. But there has to be that balance of like, if you want to have a career doing it, there has to be that kind of like cross section of something that's commercially viable at the same time.
Do you know who Grace Coddington is? There's one part in a documentary about her, and she kind of says like, you've got to put your work somewhere for it to be valid, otherwise it's invalid. And it's kind of true. It's like if your work can't sit into like culture, then it's not that it's invalid, because people also can do work at home and it can just bring them joy, and that's fine. But if you're seeking for your work to be like received by people, it has to be valid to sit in a space that then will validate it and that people can access it.
As a creative, it's like what we're doing now is thinking like, well, where could that be featured? And if you can't answer that, then you really need to think about, well, where am I going to go with this? And like, do I have to change my work slightly to feature here? So for example, if I want to feature in this fashion magazine, what do the pictures in that fashion magazine currently look like? Because if I'm creating something that looks completely different, there's a good chance they're not going to take a huge gamble and just be like, let's tell you what, we're going to ignore all of our design like views. We're just going to go for this random piece this week. So it's adapting, I suppose, to the room that we're going to fit into, and making sure that there's actually a room to fit into if you want to have a commercially viable like career. Because if there is no room, then there's no one to kind of view it. I
think a lot of artists get kind of frustrated that they have this vision and everyone's not coming along for the ride. And I think that's such a journey that you go on of like, maybe that work's not ready yet. Maybe that we can't see your unique vision because you're not articulating it well. And that might not just be the work that you're creating. That might be around the way that you talk about the work. That might be around how you market the work. And Kris, on that Adobe thing that I mentioned earlier, you said something so quickly, so off the cuff, and then it moved on to the next part. But you said, promote yourself, be shameless. And I think so many artists struggle with this aspect of actually promoting themselves and creating those opportunities by getting known and putting their work out there.
Yeah. Again, be stupidly confident. Just steal my best friend's slogan, run with it. No, but I just, but see, I referenced her, so it's very different. No, but yeah, I do think that it's really important to do that. And yeah, I just always think if you don't believe in your work, kind of why would anyone else think that it's kind of good if you don't yourself? But yeah, I just think it's always a good idea. I think often you think like, oh, things will come to me if I just put work out. And also sometimes it's really important to be like, here's this body of work I've made. I'm going to show it to these people in the hope that then they will share it or elevate it or kind of write a thing about it. And so many things that I've done, I've got because I asked for them, not because, like a lot of things I have just got an email and then that's a project. But a lot of things I've been like, I would really like to do this thing. I'm just letting you know. If you don't want me, that's fine. But I'm just telling you I would like to talk at this thing, or I would like to work with you, blah, blah, blah. And so many times they're like, oh, sick, that would be amazing. So a few times they've been like, who are you? And that's fine. Again, like not everyone can like you. So yeah, I think you just got to promote yourself and like stand up for yourself and kind of constantly be putting it out into the world and hoping that people will kind of, yeah. And I think people forget that, like, not to be on money about it, but if I owned a cafe, I would be promoting it. I'd be like, hey, come and buy from me. It's no different. If I'm a plumber, how am I going to get any clients if I don't promote it? So obviously I'm going to have to promote it. It's not something that I'm just going to sit back and wait for people to come. I have to put it in front of people for them to see it.
Yeah, I love that. We interviewed an artist recently who said you should collect no's. So you should try and get as many no's as possible. So it means you're just going for this audacious, outlandish shit. And she was like, you'd just be surprised at how many people actually say yes, even though you're trying to get the no. You're like, I want to work on this, say no to me. And they just don't. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And again, it's stupidly confident.
See, Kelly is a genius.
When I'm talking to young artists and designers, she's always the one that I'm like, you want to be Kellyanna. Like that, I feel 100%. Like it's the dream position. That's where you want to get to. Like people, like you've got a good following. People, you've got like hardcore fans that are really into your stuff, that are going to buy your prints every time you drop a new one. You've got a lot of brand interest. You've got like, you're just doing exciting projects consistently. I'm like, that's the stage you want to get to. And then they're always like, okay, great. How do I do that? And then I'm like, well, that's a much longer conversation.
Kelly worked her ass off to get where she is. If anyone worked hard, she did. And so she earned everything she had. 1,000,000% over. And she still works really hard.
That makes me think, actually, there's a designer that I was talking to recently who I said, you want to be Kellyanna to. And she's currently kind of like stuck doing the graphic design jobs that pay, like the logos and all of that sort of stuff. And she was like, how do I get out of this funk of just doing this stuff that I don't really care about to making the work that I want to make? I obviously gave her my advice, but what would you say if you were asked that question?
That's a really tricky one, because I did a lecture a while ago, and then I was saying all of these things, and like a few people were like, yeah, but you still got to pay rent. And you're like, I get that. Like, I was in the same position. I also have to pay rent. Like, no one's paying my rent for me if I'm not paying it, So there's, I took a massive risk, to be honest, and thank God it paid off, but it could have so easily not. But I had accepted plan B. I think that's the thing. Like, I have always had like a very different view on life, and I would be quite content in many situations that I think other people would not be. I just think you have to earn it. And there was a transitional period where I was working full-time in advertising, and then I was coming home and working like into the night, making work. Like, I made an exhibition with 40 pieces in it in a month while still working in advertising. And I didn't go to the movies every night. I didn't go out on the weekend. I didn't go to bar. Like, I was at home working, and that's how I got it. So you have to make sacrifices. You can't, to become successful, you have to make sacrifices. Like, that is, like, I can't express it. I mean, or you have to put yourself in such a risky scenario where you're like, I'm going to 100% focus on my work and not do anything else to pay the rent. Like, that's an incredibly risky situation to be in. So the flip side of that is, like, I didn't have parents who could just like pay for me and give me loads of money. I had to do it myself. So I was like, I worked really hard in the day, and I worked really hard somewhat hard in the day. And then I worked really hard at nighttime to make the work that I wanted to make. And it took me like 6 months a year to do it. But to be honest, I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to make work and get myself into a better scenario. So I wasn't like, oh, poor Chrissy sitting here like on Saturday night making work. I wish I was at the club. I was like, I'm fine. I'm so happy being here. I will make this work for myself.
It's that short-term sacrifice overall, because it's like, yeah, you're going to miss out on the club for a few years, but then like, actually, now I'm sure you can go to the club whenever you want to.
I mean, yeah, my goal was to always travel, be paid to travel for work, and that's happening now. And I sacrificed having a bit of fun for a year or so, but the rewards that I'm getting now of that will far outweigh the sacrifice.
I think when it comes to ambition, you and I are very similar, and I've listened to a few times that you've been interviewed and you've talked about your sort of drive and stuff. And I put out some Instagram stories the other week when Virgil Abloh died, and I was talking about how I was just like, I've got to make, like I have to make, because this was just such a reminder of like how short time is, and if there was some disaster and I only lived to be 42, I'm like, shit, I've not got much time. Like I've got to make. And then I got quite a few messages from people going like, oh man, chill out. Like don't worry, you're putting too much pressure on yourself. And I was just like, no, like this is like, it's not a bad thing. Like I want to make. That's what I want to do. I want to consistently be making, because everything comes from making.
A lot of creatives are in a fortunate position where they really like their job, or it's as if their hobby has become their career in a sense. And I think it's sometimes hard for people who work in a less exciting environment, or a job that they maybe don't love as much. It's very hard for them to understand that. So yeah, they can be like, oh man, why are you working on a Saturday? And you're like, well, because I genuinely enjoy it. It's not like a burden for me. This is I genuinely am excited by this. So I'm not like, oh, pour me in the studio on Saturday. I'm like, cool, fine. I'm so happy. I'll go and have some fun later. But right now I'm actually so fine with it. So I think it's hard sometimes for people to understand that. Obviously like the Virgil is like incredibly sad, and like it's how much to achieve in such a short time. Not to take away from that, but like I've always admired Keith Haring. Like he's my favorite artist of all time, and he died when he was 31. And I always think of that. I'm like, my God, like he died at 31. That's so young. Yeah. And all of the things he made and did and achieved. So I've always been like similar to you, that I'm like, I have to make so much, and I have so many things that I want to achieve, because I mean, who knows, maybe we live to 90 and that would be incredible. And there's also like a lot of artists that I admire that are working into their 80s, and you're like, that's so badass. Like, how cool. And it is that thing that they could have retired, but that's their hobby. And, you know, when you retire, like what else are you going to do? Obviously that you want to keep yourself busy and doing things you love. So if you love making work, that's your hobby, you're going to keep doing that. So hopefully we can live a long, happy life and make lots of work, but you do always have that thing in your back of your head, and then but I think that's a really good thing, because I really get angry at people that waste their life. I find that like probably one of the qualities in people that I hate the most, apart from like racism and ignorance and things like that, I really hate people that are just like it sounds really cheesy, but take their life kind of for granted, and they're just like don't have that like zest for like living. And you don't have to fucking live every second of your day and like, you know, enjoy every moment and blah blah blah, but it's also just being like, my time is limited, I have to really make the most of it. It's also okay to relax every now and then and take it in, but I do have to make the most of it. I think that's I mean maybe I'm different to other people, but I've always been I find it very hard to relax and not do anything, because I feel like I'm like, I just want to make the most of the situation that I'm in.
I think it's almost like once you've seen the other side and what it can be like when you are creating all the time and you do feel like every day is a joy, you're going to work, you're enjoying the things you do, you know that you
Some
can
days
continue
it
to do the
isn't,
things
though.
you enjoy.
In fairness. Yeah.
Well, that's life, isn't it? It's like if it
Some
was
days
always
you're
on a high,
exactly.
then it would never feel like it was on a high. You kind of have to go through those. But it's also, sometimes it's those long days of just plowing through this to get something done that actually you look back on and you feel great about it. I heard something the other day that was like, nostalgia is just memories without the pain. And it's like, you just think of it as being, oh, that was a fun time. But then you don't forget all the shit that you're going through whilst you're in it. But I think creating a life of nostalgia, of like great memories that there is no pain attached to them because they're in the past and you don't feel that anymore. It's like once you've experienced it and you know how good it is and you see other people who aren't in that situation, you're like, hold on, like you could be like me. You just need to do the things that I've done to get to this situation. And I think that's where a lot of people stop because they either don't know how to do it or think it's too much work to be able to get there.
Like, I feel like I actually spend very little time on the computer making work, but I feel like I'm always working, if that makes sense, because so many things are tied up in work. Like, for example, today I was at my friend's for 3 hours having a coffee, but we mainly discussed work and we were like sorting through a bunch of stuff. And it's like, maybe that didn't seem super productive, but when I left, I figured out like a bunch of things and I went to the studio for 3 hours and got loads of stuff done that I wouldn't have done had I have sat at my friend's. I have not gone to my friend's this morning, and because she's a really good painter, and I feel like we've got a similar ethos in how we like to approach work. So we kind of often talk about things and deal with it. So there's lots of things in my day that I feel, or in most creative days, that I feel like aren't necessarily creative, but they lead to the creative kind of output.
Yeah. It's also quite nice to have that thought of like, this is my life. And yes, I'm going to be creating for a small part of it. But everything else that I do is also benefiting towards that. Whereas if you're in a non-creative field, everything else you're doing around there is just floating around there. It's not benefiting anything. Whereas, it's like I'm sat watching an anime on the train and it's like, yes, it's entertaining, but I'm also getting inspiration from the visuals and stuff that are in it that I could then bring into my work here. So it's like listening to some music and like the vibe of a certain track could then come into or inspire me to create a certain photo in a certain way. And it's like being able to take all of those aspects of life is like, it's such a joy. I feel like it gives a richer, fuller life because you're experiencing all of it. Like all of it is useful in some way instead of it just being like, that's this half of my life and then this is this half of my life. It's almost like if you're trying to do two things at once, like if you're trying to make two things successful, you're probably not going to make either successful. But as soon as you go into just doing one, then there's so much more chance that can flourish.
I think that was the problem with my early 20s. I wanted to do everything and I did everything. And so I did everything moderately okay.
Yeah.
Like I had a band, I had a record label, I did art, I worked in advertising. Like nothing really worked because I was trying to get, but I think it was that need of just, I'm like, I just want to make something and I want one of those things to work so that I can be doing that for the rest of my life. It's like that weird desperation of like, just one of them works so that's like it's because it's I think a creative career is quite like an uncertain thing, and so a lot of the time you're just trying to get one of the things to work so that you can have some form of peace in your head. Like I think that's a lot of the time the hustle kind of comes from that.
And I think that moment in a creative's life is it's part of the journey that you can't skip. I don't think anyone starts at the start, finds the one thing, and then just continues doing that forever. I feel like it has to be, I'm going to try all of these different things to work out which one I actually like the most, because it's only by doing stuff you realize what you don't want to do. And it's like, oh, actually that worked, but maybe not. I won't really go down that route because the music thing's not really working and maybe I'll bring that back. But also by doing all these little things, all of those little aspects is what makes your single piece unique, because you'll take the fact that you did a bit of music once, that is going to influence your work in some way somewhere. And I think as a creative, if we're early on in that journey, it's important to try all the things because we never know which way we're going to go. Like I'm a photographer now. If you'd have asked me 5 years ago, this would never be the case. It's just because I went and tried something, enjoyed it, and I was like, oh, this is good. And then just kind of went down a route that you wouldn't expect. And I think if you feel like you've got that creative in you, then you need to help it find its path by showing it all of the different options and kind of letting it taste all of the different things. And then once you're like, okay, that's the one for me, that's when you need to cut off everything and go all in.
That's very true. And it's funny how you say like you dabble in different things, and then I don't make music anymore. I was okay at it, but I obviously wasn't great at it. But I always think about it, and I always am thinking to how I can include music in my work. And especially now I've started to animate a lot more and things like that. I start to think a lot about music again and and I'm like, maybe I was not supposed to be like the next hot chip, which was the goal. But like I learn enough that now I understand music a bit better, and then eventually I'll probably bring music into my work, and that it will make sense, and it will be like this kind of cohesive thing. And then maybe I'll go back to film, and at the end of say like a 60-year career, you'll be like, oh, I mean that's Kris, but like he did, you know, a bunch of things along the way. Like like let's just take David Hockney as an example. Like he's a painter, sure, but like he designed sets. He's like, you know, there's like a million different things he's done. Like, and a lot of artists over time, if you look at them, they've done so many different things. And I don't think you go like, oh, like, do you know who Jean-Paul Goude is? He's like a French he's amazing. He's mostly known. He's very big in France, but he's mostly known internationally for he did all of Grace Jones's artwork, like in the period that we all know. But he was like the creative director of GQ magazine, and then he worked very heavily in music, and he was kind of like Grace Jones's creative director, so he did all of that. And then he moved back to France, and he was doing like stage design and installation. And if you look at his like 50-year career, like he's well into his 80s now, and you like that, you just think, oh, that's Jean-Paul Goude, he's done all these things. You don't go like, oh, he was a theatre director, and then he kind of managed a magazine, and then he was a painter for a bit. You go, oh, that's just Jean-Paul Goude's work. And over time, it makes sense. And I think I always like to approach art like that. It's like, yeah, I do what I'm doing now, but in 5 years, maybe I'll be making music videos. In 5 years after that, I might be making like experimental music, sitting naked in a basement somewhere. Who knows? But like, I think at the end of it, you'll be like, oh, well, all of that was. There'll be kind of a continuity.
Yeah, I think the road is you just consistently make, and then it will take you to different places. And I think it's one of the main goals of this podcast is just to encourage people just to consistently make, because of where it will actually take you. And I suppose in those early years, because you can't see that it's going to take you anywhere, you're bad at the consistency. But as soon as you do realize, like, if I keep doing this, it may not. Who knows where it will end up? And I mean, this is just turning into the Kellyanna fan podcast, but I always say when you like, you could never replicate Kelly, because when you look at her work, it's everywhere that she's been. You've got dancing in there. You've got fashion, scribbling at fashion shows in there. Like every piece of where she's been, she just takes a little bit, and you can't help but, as you live life and go on these journeys, you can't help but these little parts to come into your work. And if you're consistently making it, the work takes you there. It will just take you itself. I just sort of got this picture of like a person being just picked up by the work and like kind of rolled along, and that's essentially what happens.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best way to approach it. I know what it's like to be 20 and be like, fuck, nothing's working, and like, what do I do? And it's so frustrating, and it's so shitty, but then it does work out eventually, and you just have to have patience, because if you don't, you'll just drive yourself mad. But I know I was so restless and so impatient and so like, why is nothing working? Yeah. It was to the point of enraging, but you just have to get through it.
And I feel like the creators who succeed and are still doing it at the end are the ones who just didn't give up. It's like when all the shit hit them, they didn't stop and they just kept going. And I think anyone you're looking at now as inspiration, everyone went through shit. Everyone went through awful work that they hated. And even now they'll still make work that they hate. But it's like, you just need to keep pushing through it.
I always use Janet Jackson as like a metaphor. And she had like, everyone kind of sees her as like this album Control, which was her first album. Really, it was her third album. And because she did these 2 albums before that were just like, hey, you're Michael Jackson's sister. Here, go with these producers and record this album, and like, you'll be really famous. And they just did fuck all, because you know, but she just kept hustling, and then finally she got her chance because she'd been doing it for so long that they kind of gave her a bit of creative control, and she was like, I'm going to do this now. And you think like Janet Jackson, like most famous woman in the world, like very, very famous person, like surely she never had to go through these shitty things. And it's like she literally went through 2 albums, what's that, 8 years, probably did 2 world tours, all of this music she probably hates, didn't want to do, and then eventually it led to her like finally getting a chance to make music that actually represented her, and then from then she went massive and had this like full career.
Listen, dude, it's been so great to chat to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Could you let everyone know where they can find you online?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like Instagram is probably the best way to find me, which is my name, Kris with a K, Andrew Small.
Awesome. Thank you, dude.
Thank you so much, Steve.